Live. My name is Dustin Jones, and you are listening to the PT on Ice Daily Show brought to you by the Institute of Clinical Excellence. Good to see everyone. Everyone's rolling in here. It is Wednesday. That means it's Jerry on Ice, where we talk about all things older adults. It's also Hump Day. Hump Day Hustle. Email from the CEO of Ice, Jeff Moore, just went out at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Excited to look at that one. All right, folks are rolling in. Awesome. So once again, my name is Dustin Jones. I am one of two lead faculty within the older adult division of ICE, teaching modern management of the older adult curriculum. So we have our two online courses, which is Essential Foundations and then Advanced Concepts, and then our live course. So today's episode, what we're going to be talking about, y'all, is kettlebell training, and particularly the impact of kettlebell training in older adults. And this is a review of the Bell trial. The Bell trial. This is an article that I've been waiting a long time for, and excited to dig into it, break it down, and give some tips, some advice, some perspective that we may be able to use with the older adults that you are serving. Before we get into that, just a few announcements. I mentioned Hump Day, the Hump Day Hustle email. If you haven't got that, be sure to get on that list. That is a very succinct but jam-packed email that goes out to thousands and thousands of individuals. That is a great resource. I know for me, and I know many of you all can say that as well. If you're not on that, just go to ptonice.com and then go to the resources tab, and you'll find that Hump Day Hustle email. In terms of courses coming up, MOA, Essential Foundations, the next cohort is starting on August 18th, so that's coming up pretty quick. We already have a pretty awesome showing for that so far. That cohort may sell out, so I would grab that seat a little bit sooner than later. Our Advanced Concepts is striking up in October. We only run that twice a year, and that's for folks that want to continue to progress in how they serve older adults, but then also pursue their certification in modern management of the older adult, or CERT MMOA. In terms of our live courses, we are taking kind of a little bit of a break right now, but this fall, winter, and then spring of 2022 is going to be nuts. We're probably going to be relatively close to your neck of the woods. I know we have a private course that Christine is teaching this week. We're going to be in Evans, Georgia in August. That's outside of Augusta. We're going to be in Wyoming middle of September. We're going to be around Seattle in October. So we're going to be all over the place over the next year or so. So hopefully we'll see y'all out on the road. All right, let's do this. So I want to give kind of a personal background story related to this article, and then we'll dive into it and get to the good stuff. So back in around 2015, I started to become active on social media in a professional sense. And back then, it was mainly Twitter. Now we're all getting, we're interacting on Instagram, on Facebook. Back in the day, it was solely on Twitter. And I was a new grad physical therapist, but then I was also interested in fitness, and I had my RKC1, which is a Russian kettlebell certification. And at the time, I was doing home health, and I was trying to blend those worlds and just learning a lot about how the kettlebell can be a very powerful tool for home health clinicians, but definitely for older adults in general, regardless of setting. But there wasn't a lot of material speaking to leveraging this tool and this type of training with older adults. And there was one other individual that I connected with on Twitter that was a physical therapist or physiotherapist, but then also held their RKC1, and we could speak the same language, and that was Neil May, aka the Kettlebell Physio. So we've interacted over the years, and I've watched him, start his own clinic. I've watched him start an older adult fitness program, and then pursue his PhD to test a lot of his assumptions. Very similar to my partner in crime, Christina Previtt, who pursued her PhD to really answer some tough questions related, what's the best type of training for older adults? What can they benefit from? Neil is a similar story. And so Neil has just been getting after it over the past few years, pursuing his PhD, and then has published this Bell trial. Bell stands for Ballistic Exercise of the Lower Limb. And I want to dive into this because this is something I've been waiting a long time for. I'm super excited for Neil. I know he's put so much work into this. I know many of you are going to benefit from his efforts in this research here. So the title of this article, I'll just read this verbatim, is Effects of Supervised High-Intensity Hardstyle Kettlebell Training on Grip Strength and Health-Related Physical Fitness in Insufficiently Active Older Adults, the Bell Pragmatic Controlled Trial. So when you hear hardstyle kettlebell training, Typically, many folks think about when they hear hardstyle, they think a Russian kettlebell swing versus an American kettlebell swing, where the Russian kettlebell swing ends around the shoulder, and then American kettlebell swing ends in full, shoulder extension over the head. But it's a style of training where there's a big emphasis on creating tension in very specific areas throughout your body, while relaxing other areas. So it's a school of thought, a school of training. So when you see RKC, which is a Russian kettlebell certification, or SFG, which is strong first, those are hard style training methods. And most of the time, when you see someone working out with kettlebells, it is going to be hard style kettlebell training. So the aim of this study was to measure the change in health-related physical fitness following 3 months of moderate to high intensity group hardstyle kettlebell training in these insufficiently active men and women over 60 in comparison with 3 months of their usual activities of daily living. And so I'm just going to go through all these details, make sure we're good to go, and then we'll talk about some of the practical application pieces. So they had 32 folks that started this study. 28 finished at least 6 weeks of training. And what they did is they had 12 weeks of usual activity, which is considered their control. So they did not have a separate control group. They just controlled their activity at the beginning and then compared what this kettlebell training did produced in them as a result. So after that 12 weeks of control, which is their usual activities, they did 12 weeks of hardstyle kettlebell training. Now, and this is where kudos to Neil and the team that produced this paper, that they started this right at the beginning of the pandemic. And I feel his pain because Jeff Musgrave and I started Stronger Life right before the pandemic. And so as you read this paper, he had this grand vision, this grand idea of what this would look like in this training, these group classes, and what they would do and when they would do it. And then COVID-19 just completely demolished all of his plans, but continued to create some pretty amazing service here for these folks and got some awesome results. Now that 12 weeks of training, what happened is that 6 weeks of that was face-to-face training sessions. And then March 23rd happened. Many of you all remember kind of that period of time when everything just kind of shut down. And so the last 6 weeks of this trial was done virtually via Zoom. And that is not an easy thing. Any of you all that are coaching or in the realm of fitness, and many of you all that had to switch to telehealth know the pain that we all felt, a year and a half ago. Very difficult scenario. So in terms of these individuals, like I said before, they were over 60, ended up being over 59, and they had to be able to live independently was their inclusion criteria. Now, in terms of people that were excluded, I'm going to read this because it's going to give us a good idea of kind of who these people are in this study. Exclusion criteria: medical conditions or medications known to affect musculoskeletal health, which limit the capacity to perform moderate to high intensity exercise. So that could limit a good bit of people, right? Especially in the context of physical therapy. So for example, osteoporosis, done. You're not going to be in this study. If you had some type of peripheral neuropathy related diabetes, done. Not going to happen. Something along those lines. So as you can imagine, these folks, just from that alone, somewhat healthy individuals, we could say. Still inactive, but somewhat healthy. Next, recent surgery or trauma. All right. Uncontrolled cardiovascular respiratory disease. Okay. Engaged in a structured exercise program within the past 9 months. And that's where they can say these were inactive older adults, that they have not participated in any exercise. Malignancy, inability to perform a floor transfer independently. And then inability to comfortably lift the upper extremities overhead. Unexplained pain with fundamental movements, activities, or presence of hazards which would prevent body composition analysis. So as a result, 32 folks got into this. And if you kind of look at that inclusion criteria, exclusion criteria, I would say this is a pretty common individual over 59. A lot of folks that in this study that we would see, definitely in the outpatient setting, that you would see a lot of these folks in your physical therapy clinic. So that's who we're working with here. Now, in terms of their outcomes that they tested at baseline at several intervals throughout the study, their primary measure was grip strength, which many of you all may say, well, why grip strength? Who cares about that? Well, that is an absolutely huge measure that is so predictive of so many outcomes that we really care about in Jerry PT, in terms of level of independence, in terms of quality of life, premature or mortality risk as well. All kinds of measures that grip strength has been correlated to. It's a great screen and something that is worth being a primary measure. The secondary measures were abundant. They did things along the lines of running a DEXA. They did their blood pressure. They did a bunch of different functional measures like the 5 times floor transfer test and the 30-second sit to stand test. They did objective strength measurements as well, and a lot of subjective measurements in terms of their session RPE and the SF36, which looks at health-related quality of life. So a lot of secondary measures that they took with these individuals. Now, in terms of what they did, they had 3 times a week, 45-minute sessions, and they had 2 times a week of a home exercise program that they used a kettlebell and did the movements that they did in the training session. Like I said before, 6 were in person and 6 went virtual. And so what that looked like, a lot of this was based on, I think this may be the first time this book may be referenced in scientific literature, was Pavel, I always butcher his last name, Tsatsouline. I always call him Pavel. If you have spent any time around the world of fitness, strength, and conditioning, you have likely heard or seen some of Pavel's material. This guy is an absolute legend. He's quite the character. Just think, if you're a fan of Parks and Rec, like he is the Russian Ron Swanson, if you will, but super fit. Very strong individual, but he is the one that created the RKC, the Russian Kettlebell certification. He left Dragon Door and went and started Strong First, so he's doing, I believe he's doing the SFG now. But he had this book called Enter the Kettlebell, which really introduced a lot of mainstream strength and conditioning folks to kettlebell training. Awesome book. So week 1, they leveraged a lot of what was spoke to into that book, Enter the Kettlebell. Week 1, they introed kind of a standard mobility drill that people would do at the beginning of every session, and they familiarized people with some of these foundational kettlebell exercises, which are the swing. This is the Russian swing, so the range of motion ends at the shoulder. You've got the clean, which is where you take the kettlebell from the ground, hike it back up to the shoulder. You have the military press, which is a strict press overhead. You have a goblet squat as well, holding that kettlebell underneath your chin. And then you have a Turkish get up as well, which proved to be very difficult to do in that group setting, so they ended up not doing that in the training session. So that was week 1. And then week 2 and 3, the first 2 weeks, this is important, we're going to talk about this in a little bit, was low intensity. A 2 to 4 out of 10 on a modified RPE. This was meant to be easy, and their volume was typically a little bit lower because they were trying to minimize the likelihood of delayed onset muscle soreness. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. And then after that, so after week 3, they got to an RPE of 5 to 7 out of 10, described as heavy or hard, and they were able to progress weight in their routines whenever they perceived that things were getting easier or a 4 out of 10 or less than 4 out of 10. Home exercise program was kind of easy to moderate, and they all started with the 8-kilogram kettlebell. So 5 days a week of training, all right? Pretty solid. When I look at the criteria in terms of the participants, when I see the training methodology and what they went through, my initial reaction is there's not a lot of people that would do this. It's a lot. I think many of you all would probably agree with me. So their conclusion, they had some really interesting results. Obviously, there's a lot of weaknesses with this trial. They did not have a separate control group. These folks were not blinded. There was a lot of difficulties with executing their plan because of COVID-19. But all that aside, these folks got a lot fitter. Kettlebell training resulted in a large, clinically important increase in grip strength. Awesome. With significant improvements in cardiovascular capacity, lean muscle mass, lower limb strength, and endurance and functional capacity. All participants in the present study demonstrate a positive adaptive response to one or more outcomes. Awesome. All right, let's dig into some of the takeaways, get into some more of the details and things that I found interesting that hopefully will be helpful for you. So the first takeaway thing that I want to bring light to is their adherence rate with their training sessions, but then also their home exercise program. So I want you to look at some of these stats. Adherence rate for training sessions was 91.5% over a 12-week period. 91.5%. 3 times a week for 45 minutes. Half of those were done virtually. Adherence rate for their home exercise program, listen to this, 88.7%. 88.7%. And then a third of them, of those folks, are still training today. And I believe, and Neil, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they're unsupervised. I think they're just getting together and just getting after it with some kettlebells. A third of them are still training today. These adherence rates are awesome. When I think about what I've experienced in Stronger Life, in the home health setting, and outpatient, that's a pretty awesome adherence rate for a training session, but definitely a home exercise program. 88.7% for home exercise program, 91.5% for their training sessions. And I think this really speaks to a couple things. One is the introduction of these activities. They were very thoughtful in their dosage early on. They were intentionally underdosing to limit DOMs to create success and a somewhat pleasant experience for these folks to get them hooked. If you did not do that, if you dose properly at the beginning, you run the risk of DOMs in folks that have not exercised before that may perceive that to be harmful, to not be enjoyable, and they will not come back. It's very different, right? For many of you all watching this right now, you exercise. You know what it feels like to be sore. You expect that, and you know it's going to go away. But many folks, especially older adults that have not participated in a structured exercise program, DOMS is a big deal and can be very, very scary for them. And the methodology did a great job of on-ramping people to limit that DOMS. Even though they may have been capable of doing more, they were still doing easy. So that's one thing. The next thing is their built-in accountability. From the tracking standpoint of tracking their sessions, they had to report their sessions when they complete their home exercise program. But then also they built community into this. And this is something that I've experienced in Stronger Life, is that when you bring peers together in a community environment, in person, but then also virtually, the organic accountability comes together and results in people sticking to these activities and really creating a habit. I love what they did. They had drink vouchers for this little coffee shop right outside of where they were doing their training sessions. So these folks would hang out for a period of time after the training sessions, which created those relationships, with probably created that accountability and probably bumped up that adherence rate. And then they also had a private Facebook group. This is something that we definitely see at Stronger Life, that community piece is absolutely huge. We want to try and create that whenever we can. So the adherence rates were awesome. They also did a great job of showing progress. We talk about this with building the bike, but progress is very addictive. You all see this when you gather your asterisk signs, you do a test, treat, retest. You see, people are able to see the progress that they're able to make in a very short period of time, and it's very addictive for them. You can do that with fitness as well. CrossFit obviously does a great job with this, with their benchmark workouts, how objective their workouts are, and then when you repeat that workout, you can see how better you've gotten. They did the same thing in this trial. And I think all those things positively influences this adherence rate, and these are things we want to think about even in the context of physical therapy. Number two, functional implications were pretty big for this group of people. Two measures in particular were very interesting. One, the 30-second sit-to-stand test, which in terms in the world of JPT, this is a very valuable test, and the 5-time sit-to-stand test. If you can make a clinically significant change in these tests, you've really influenced someone's functional trajectory likely, and their quality of life and their independence. These folks had a mean improvement of 23% in their 30-second sit-to-stand test, which is absolutely awesome. A 23% improvement is pretty amazing. They also got a 14% improvement in their 5 times floor transfer test without training that movement whatsoever. So they did not end up doing Turkish get-ups because it was difficult to do in that group setting. But despite not working on getting to the ground whatsoever, the group by and large improved by 14%. And so this type of training where we're leveraging some of these compound lifts at a relatively higher intensity has big functional implications, because a lot of those skills and that capacity translates to functional implications in their real world. And we cannot ignore that, especially with older adults when function and independence is such a huge part of their quality of life. That was awesome. I mentioned intentional underdosage before. We really want to think about that in terms of the clinical setting. I know the tough part, though, is with many of you all, your length or your course of care may be limited, right, in terms of time. And that's where, even though you know someone may be capable of doing so much more, we may want to intentionally underdose, especially if you are introducing an implement or a particular exercise to these folks. Because if you dose at where they may be appropriate, right, in terms of their actual capacity, but their perception is that they're not able to do it and they're very fearful, and then they come back and they have a nice case of delayed onset muscle soreness, many folks that are not experienced with exercise, that could come back to bite you in the rear end, as opposed to having a slow on-ramp to where then after a couple weeks, then ramp up that intensity. Your adherence rates are likely going to be much higher. You don't have a lot of time though, right? You may not have that luxury. So that's where we want to have those community partners that you may intentionally underdose to introduce some of this stuff and then hand them off to someone in your community or do it yourself in the context of wellness or fitness. Intentional underdosage is very helpful, especially for this group of people that have very little experience and a lot of fear and potentially anxiety around higher intensity exercise or implements like a kettlebell or a barbell. And then the last but not least, the physical benefits are rather clear, right? They didn't compare to another style of training, right? They didn't compare to a barbell-based program or even the generic seated TheraX, right? So we can't make these substantial claims about this effectiveness compared to other interventions, but it's helpful, right? Everyone positively adapted in a rather significant way. But one thing that we cannot we really want to emphasize is the psychological benefits to this style of training. And associated with the Bell trial is also a qualitative study where they did interviews and asked people, how they changed in terms of their perception of themselves, what they think they're capable of doing. How did this style of training influence their lives? And I spoke to this a few weeks ago on how to change lives with an AMRAP set. And this is something that we're seeing in Stronger Life all the time, is that these folks come in beaten down by the message they receive in mass media, in the medical system, in physical therapy, that they are not able to do X, Y, and Z, that they are too old or they are too out of shape, that they cannot do kettlebell or barbell deadlifts. They cannot do all these different things, that they are too fragile and they will break. This is a very consistent perception by many, many folks. We see this in Stronger Life, and then as we expose them to this style of training, we intentionally underdose for a period of time, then we ramp it up. They are seeing progress on a regular basis. They are doing things they never thought they could do. We're trying to set them up in successful situations, and they see the results. We make sure they see the results by building the bike, and it really changes their perception of what they're capable of doing. We target their self-efficacy with the kettlebell or the dumbbell or the barbell, whatever it may be. And that is very, very powerful. So do not undermine the psychological benefits of leveraging this style of training with individuals, because it could literally change their lives. Literally change their lives. And I think that's where a kettlebell, a barbell, and even, bigger, heavier dumbbells really set themselves apart from TheraBand. To be honest, even though sometimes, TheraBand is appropriate for folks, it can be helpful in certain situations, but it doesn't have that same psychological benefit that something like these other implements like a barbell or a kettlebell can have. And that's something that we really want to think about alongside the physical benefits that we talk about all the time on this show. So this is a long one, 23 minutes. My goodness, I apologize, y'all, but I've been really excited about this article. Excited to dig into it. There's more articles that are going to come from this trial, so Neil's working on that. I'm going to link to the PT on Ice videos I mentioned, to the qualitative study, the Bell pragmatic trial, all that stuff is going to be on the Facebook video. So check that out for all those links. I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts on this if you get a hold of this. Otherwise, y'all have a lovely, lovely Wednesday, and I will talk to you soon. See y'all.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to the PT on Ice Daily Show. If you enjoyed this content, head on over to iTunes and leave us a review. And be sure to check us out on Facebook and Instagram at the Institute of Clinical Excellence. If you're interested in getting plugged into more ICE content on a weekly basis while earning CEUs from home, check out our virtual ICE online mentorship program at ptonice.com. While you're there, sign up for our Hump Day Hustling newsletter for a free email every Wednesday morning with our top 5 research articles and social media posts that we think are worth reading. Head over to ptonice.com and scroll to the bottom of the page to sign up.